Hello and welcome back. You are listening to English Unlocked, a calm English podcast where you improve your listening skills through stories, atmosphere, and real emotions. My name is Daniel, and I'm really glad you're here with me today. This podcast is created for people who want to learn English in a gentle way, without pressure, without rushing, without the fear of making mistakes. Here, English is something you slowly get used to, something that becomes familiar over time, something that starts to feel natural. Today's episode is a winter story, a story about a train ride on a cold winter day. Train journeys have a special kind of rhythm, the sound of wheels on the tracks, the quiet movement forward, the feeling of being in between places. When you sit on a train, you don't need to do anything. You're already moving, even if you're sitting still. And that makes it a perfect space for reflection. You can listen to this episode while resting, walking, or simply sitting quietly. There is no need to understand every word. There is no need to repeat anything unless you want to. Just listen. Listening helps your brain relax into the language. It allows sounds, words, and sentences to settle naturally. Little by little, English becomes easier. At English Unlocked, we believe that stories are one of the best ways to learn. Stories create images. They create feelings. And those feelings help language stay with you. In today's story, we will follow a quiet winter train ride. No rush, no drama, just movement, silence, and small moments that feel meaningful when winter slows everything down. Before the story begins, take a moment for yourself. Take a deep breath. Relax your shoulders. Let the outside world fade just a little. You are here now. You are listening, and that is enough. In the next part, we will slowly step into the atmosphere of this winter journey. Before the story truly begins, let's arrive at the place where everything happens. A train station in winter has its own kind of silence. Not an empty silence, but a quiet filled with movement, breath, and waiting. Imagine the platform early in the morning. The sky is pale and cold, almost colorless. Your breath becomes visible the moment you step outside. Snow rests softly on the ground, untouched in some places, pressed down in others by countless footsteps. The train hasn't arrived yet. People stand scattered along the platform, wrapped in coats and scarves. Some look at their phones. Some stare down the tracks. Some simply stand still, hands in pockets, lost in thought. There is no rush. Everyone knows the train will come. A quiet announcement echoes through the station. The words are calm, almost gentle. They float through the cold air and disappear. Somewhere in the distance you hear it. The train. At first it's just a low sound, a vibration more than a noise. Then it becomes clearer. The metal wheels, the steady rhythm, the sense of something approaching. The train arrives slowly, as if it understands the winter morning. Doors open. Warm air flows out. People step inside. As you enter the train, the cold stays behind. Inside, everything feels different. The lights are soft. The air is warm. The windows begin to fog slightly from the contrast between winter and warmth. You find a seat by the window. The sound of the doors closing is quiet but final. The train begins to move. Outside, the platform slides away. The station disappears, and the journey begins. Train rides create a strange and beautiful feeling. You are moving forward, but you don't need to do anything. You can think. You can remember. You can simply watch. Snow-covered fields pass by the window. Bare trees stand still against the pale sky. Small houses appear and disappear quietly like scenes from a slow film. Inside the train, there are small human sounds. A page turning. A cup being placed on a table. someone clearing their throat, a soft conversation nearby, but no one speaks loudly. Winter seems to slow everyone down. This is the kind of space where thoughts come naturally, not forced, not rushed, just present. This train is not only moving through the landscape, it's moving through a moment in time, a moment where past and future feel less heavy. And somewhere on this train, our story begins. In the next part, we will meet the person sitting by the window, the one watching the winter world pass by, the one carrying quiet thoughts into this journey. When you're ready, we'll begin. The story begins with Daniel sitting by the window of the train. He chose this seat on purpose. Daniel always liked watching the world move past him, especially in winter. There was something calming about seeing snow-covered fields and quiet towns slide by slowly without asking anything from him. Outside, the landscape was almost completely white. Snow rested gently on trees, rooftops, and empty roads. The sky was pale and still, as if the day itself was holding its breath. Inside the train, everything felt warm and steady. The soft hum of the engine blended with the quiet sounds of passengers settling into their seats. Someone nearby unwrapped a sandwich. A cup of coffee released a faint, comforting smell. Daniel leaned back and let his eyes follow the rhythm of the journey. This trip wasn't long, just a few hours, but it felt important in a quiet way. He hadn't traveled to escape something, and he wasn't rushing toward anything either. This winter train ride was simply a pause, a moment between where he had been and where he was going next. Daniel rested his forehead lightly against the cool glass of the window. The contrast between the cold outside and the warmth inside felt comforting. It reminded him that different things can exist at the same time. Movement and stillness, past and future, effort and rest. The last few weeks had been busy. The end of the year always was. Conversations, plans, expectations. Everyone seemed to be moving quickly toward something new. But Daniel felt different this year. Not tired exactly, and just thoughtful. He thought about the year behind him. The things that worked out, the things that didn't. The moments that seemed small at the time but later proved important. Outside, the train passed a small village. A few houses stood close together, smoke rising from chimneys. Lights glowed warmly behind windows. Daniel wondered about the people inside those houses. What kind of morning they were having. What kind of thoughts they were carrying into the day. The train continued forward. He took a slow breath and closed his eyes for a moment, listening. The steady sound of the wheels on the tracks felt almost like a heartbeat, calm, regular, reassuring. Daniel realized that this was one of the reasons he loved train journeys. They allowed space. Space to think without pressure. Space to feel without needing to explain. Space to simply be present. He opened his eyes again and looked at his reflection in the glass. It appeared faintly, layered over the winter scenery outside. For a brief moment, Daniel felt as if he were watching himself from a distance, not judging, not analyzing, just noticing. He didn't need answers right now. He didn't need a clear plan. This train ride wasn't about arriving. It was about moving. Moving gently, moving quietly. Moving forward even if the direction wasn't fully clear yet. As the train carried him deeper into the winter landscape, Daniel settled into his seat, allowing the journey to unfold one moment at a time. And somewhere between the passing trees and the soft hum of the train, the story of this winter ride truly began. The train moved steadily forward, and with every kilometer, Daniel felt his thoughts slow down. There was no signal for messages, No urgent notifications pulling his attention away. Just the quiet rhythm of the journey and the winter world outside. Daniel wrapped his hands around the warm cup of tea he had bought at the station. The heat seeped gently into his fingers, grounding him in the moment. He took a slow sip and watched as the train crossed a wide, open field covered in untouched snow. This kind of view always made him reflective. He thought about how often life felt rushed, how easy it was to move from one responsibility to the next without noticing how much energy that took. Days blended together. Weeks passed quickly. But here, on this train, time felt different. Daniel remembered a moment from earlier in the year, a simple conversation that stayed with him longer than expected. Someone had asked him, very casually, "Are you happy with where you are?" At the time, he didn't know how to answer, not because the answer was negative, but because it was complicated. Happiness, he realized, wasn't a single feeling. It was a collection of moments, some quiet, some difficult, some warm and reassuring. The train passed another station without stopping. A few people stood on the platform, waiting for a different journey. Daniel wondered where they were going and why. He leaned his head back and closed his eyes again. He thought about the things he had learned this year. Not big lessons, not dramatic changes, small understandings. That rest is not a weakness. That slowing down doesn't mean falling behind. That not every question needs an immediate answer. Outside, the landscape began to change slightly. The open fields gave way to clusters of trees, their bare branches reaching upward like quiet outlines against the pale sky. Daniel opened his eyes and watched carefully. There was something comforting about knowing the train would continue moving even if he did nothing at all. He didn't have to push. He didn't have to decide. The journey was already happening. A soft announcement sounded inside the carriage, naming the next stop. Daniel listened without reacting. It wasn't his station yet. For the first time in a long while, he felt no pressure to arrive quickly. No need to be somewhere else. No need to be different. Just here. Just now. He looked again at the winter scene outside the window. Everything looked peaceful, even the empty roads and quiet villages. Winter stripped the world down to its simplest shapes, and somehow that made everything clearer. Daniel took another sip of tea and exhaled slowly. This train ride was doing something gentle but important. It was reminding him that movement doesn't always feel dramatic. Sometimes it feels like sitting still while the world carries you forward. And as the train continued through the snowy landscape, Daniel allowed himself to rest inside that thought, trusting the journey, trusting the pace, and letting the quiet carry him a little further. The train continued its steady movement, and Daniel felt himself settling deeper into the rhythm of the journey. The gentle rocking of the carriage, the low hum beneath his feet. Everything worked together to create a space where thoughts moved slowly and naturally. Across the aisle, a woman sat by another window. Daniel hadn't noticed her before. She looked calm, wrapped in a long coat, her scarf pulled close around her neck. In her hands, she held a small book, but she wasn't reading. Instead, she stared out the window, just like he had been earlier. There was something familiar about her stillness. Daniel didn't try to guess her story. He had learned that assumptions often said more about the observer than the person being observed. But he couldn't help noticing the quiet focus in her expression, the same gentle distance he felt inside himself. The train passed through a stretch of forest. Tall trees stood close together, their branches dusted with snow. The light shifted as the train moved, shadows and brightness flowing softly across the carriage. For a brief moment, the woman looked away from the window and their eyes met. Not long enough to feel uncomfortable, just long enough to acknowledge each other. She offered a small, polite smile. Daniel returned it. Nothing more happened. No words, no conversation. And yet the moment felt complete. Sometimes, Daniel thought, connection didn't need explanation. It didn't need language. It could exist quietly, in shared silence, in the understanding that two people were experiencing the same pause in time. The woman returned to her book, turning a page slowly. Daniel looked back out the window. Snow began to fall again. At first it was light, small flakes drifting lazily through the air. Then it grew steadier, softening the landscape even more. Fields, trees, rooftops, everything blended into a single calm scene. Daniel felt a subtle warmth in his chest. This was what winter offered, when allowed. Not only cold or darkness, but clarity. Simplicity, moments where nothing needed to be fixed. He thought about how often people tried to fill silence, with words, with noise, with distraction. But this train ride showed him something different. Silence could be shared. Silence could be gentle. Silence could be enough. Another announcement echoed quietly through the carriage. The next station was approaching. Daniel checked the name displayed above the door. Still not his stop. He felt no impatience. Instead, he felt grateful for the extra time, for the continued movement, for the chance to remain in this quiet state just a little longer. The woman across the aisle stood up slowly, preparing to leave. She placed her book into her bag and adjusted her scarf. Before stepping into the aisle, she glanced toward Daniel again and nodded slightly, a simple gesture of acknowledgement. Daniel nodded back. Then she was gone, moving calmly toward the door as the train slowed. The doors opened. Cold air rushed in briefly, and then they closed again. The train continued forward. Daniel watched as the platform disappeared behind them, replaced once more by snow-covered land and distant trees. He realized that moments like this, when small, human, unspoken, often stayed longer than long conversations ever did. As the train picked up speed again, Daniel leaned back in his seat, feeling quietly grounded. The journey was nearing its end, but something important had already happened. He felt lighter, not because something had changed dramatically, but because he had allowed himself to be fully present. And as winter continued to move past the window, Daniel carried that feeling with him, knowing it would stay, even after the train finally stopped. The train began to slow down almost imperceptibly at first. Daniel noticed it not by sound, but by feeling. The gentle change in rhythm beneath his feet, the slight shift in movement that signaled the journey was nearing its end. Outside, the landscape started to look more familiar. Houses appeared more frequently now. Streetlights lined quiet roads. Snow still covered everything, but the shapes of the town were clearer, closer. This was his stop. Daniel felt no rush to stand up, no urgency to gather his things. He allowed himself to remain seated for a few more moments, watching the final stretch of the journey unfold outside the window. There was something meaningful about arriving slowly. He thought about how different this felt from most days, days filled with schedules, messages, and expectations. This train ride had offered something rare, uninterrupted time to simply exist. The train came to a gentle stop. Doors opened. Cold winter air flowed into the carriage, crisp and clean. People stood, reached for bags, moved quietly toward the exit. Daniel stood up too. As he stepped onto the platform, the cold wrapped around him instantly, but it didn't feel harsh. It felt refreshing, grounding. Snow crunched softly beneath his boots, and his breath formed small clouds in front of his face. The station was calm. No crowds, no loud announcements, just the quiet continuation of the day. Daniel paused for a moment and looked back at the train. It stood still now, its lights glowing softly against the winter sky. Soon it would continue on, carrying other passengers, other thoughts, other quiet moments forward. But this part of the journey was complete. He adjusted his coat and began walking slowly toward the exit of the station. Each step felt steady, intentional. He noticed small details, the way light reflected on the snow, the distant sound of footsteps, the quiet hum of the town waking up around him. The train ride had not given him answers. It had not changed his plans. It had not solved anything. But it had done something important. It had reminded him that moving forward didn't have to feel rushed. That silence could be shared without loneliness. That stillness could exist even while life continued. Daniel carried those thoughts with him as he stepped out into the winter street. The air felt sharp and clear, and for the first time in a while, he felt fully present, not pulled backward by the past or forward by expectations. Just here, just now. As he walked away from the station, the sound of the train faded behind him, replaced by the quiet rhythm of his own footsteps. The journey was over, but the feeling it created, calm, trust, and gentle movement, stayed with him. And in that quiet winter town, Daniel continued forward, knowing that sometimes the most meaningful journeys are not about where we arrive, but about how we move along the way. And now, as this winter train ride comes to an end, I invite you to stay with this feeling for just a little longer. There is no need to hurry back into your day. No need to switch quickly to the next task or thought. Just notice where you are right now. This story was not about big events or dramatic changes. It was about a quiet journey, the kind that often happens without us fully noticing it. Daniel didn't find answers on that train. He didn't make promises or life-changing decisions, but he allowed himself something rare: space. Space to think without pressure. Space to feel without judgment. Space to simply move forward at a natural pace. And maybe, as you listened, you felt something similar. Maybe you noticed how English sounded calmer than usual. Maybe words felt easier to follow. Maybe you didn't understand everything, and that was okay. Because listening like this is not about control. It's about trust. When you listen regularly, your brain learns quietly. It connects sounds. It recognizes patterns. It becomes familiar with the rhythm of the language. That is real progress. At English Unlocked, this is exactly what we want to create for you. A place where English feels human, gentle, and possible. A place where learning fits into your life instead of adding pressure to it. You don't need to be perfect to move forward. You don't need to understand every word to improve. You only need consistency, patience, and kindness toward yourself. Just like a train journey. You sit, you listen, and without forcing anything, you arrive somewhere new. As this episode ends, I encourage you to carry this calm with you into the rest of your day. Let yourself move slowly when you can. Let yourself pause when you need to. And remember, progress doesn't always feel loud. Sometimes it feels like quiet movement through a winter landscape. Thank you for spending this time with me. Thank you for listening. Thank you for choosing to learn in a gentle way. If you enjoyed this episode, you're always welcome to come back for more calm English stories and listening practice here on English Unlocked. Until next time, take care of yourself, trust your pace, and keep moving forward gently. See you in the next episode.